My name is Betty Baker. I'm 36 years old. At Thanksgiving dinner, in front of 14 people, my sister stood up and announced that our parents were signing the house to her, that I was getting nothing. Everyone at the table applauded. I picked up my water glass and looked at my father. I said, "Dad, should I tell them, or will you?" His fork dropped. My sister screamed, "Tell us what?" I put the glass down, got my coat, and walked out before dessert. What none of them knew, what my sister still didn't understand when she was screaming that question across the table, was that I had been sitting on something for over 3 years, something that made the entire announcement irrelevant before she'd finished making it. This is what happened. My family has a photograph on the living room wall. 4 frames in a row, each one a different Baker family portrait taken across the years. In 3 of those 4 frames, Tiffany is in the center. I noticed that when I was maybe 12 years old. I didn't say anything about it. I just noticed. That's probably the most accurate summary of my childhood I can give you. I noticed things, and I didn't say anything about them. I grew up in Dublin, Ohio, in a 3-bedroom house on a quiet street where the neighbors had the same lawn service and the same general understanding of how life was supposed to go. You work, you save, you hand things down to your children. My parents, Raymond and Carol Baker, believed in that order. My father was a contractor who built things with his hands for 30 years before his body started asking him to slow down. My mother managed the household the way some people manage a small country, with complete authority and an unshakable sense of who deserved what. Tiffany deserved most things. She's 30 now, 6 years younger than me. And those 6 years might as well have been a different generation in terms of how our parents saw us. Tiffany was the baby. Tiffany was sensitive. Tiffany needed more. I heard those phrases so often growing up that I stopped registering them as explanations and started hearing them as policy. This is just how things are. This is the Baker family operating procedure. I want to be fair about my mother. She loved both of us. I believe that, genuinely. She just loved Tiffany in a way that took up all the oxygen in the room. And she loved me in the way you love a piece of furniture that's always where you left it. Reliable, useful, present, but not something you think about consciously. You only notice it when it's gone. My father was different. He was quieter about it, but he saw things more clearly than my mother did. He just didn't say so out loud very often. That was Raymond Baker's particular limitation. He understood more than he expressed. And that gap between understanding and expression caused more damage than he probably ever intended. I left for Ohio State in 2005. Full academic scholarship. I applied for it myself, researched the process myself, submitted everything myself, and got it. I remember telling my parents over dinner. My mother smiled and said that was nice, and then asked Tiffany if she'd finished her homework. Tiffany was 14 and had a math test the next day. That was the priority. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because it's the data. It's the pattern. And the pattern matters for everything that comes after. I graduated in 2009 with a degree in Health Services Administration. I took a position at a Columbus hospital system in 2014 after building my way up through smaller roles. And I became good, genuinely good at what I do. My job is paperwork in the most consequential sense of the word. Insurance compliance, contract review, billing coordination, the administrative architecture that determines whether patients get care and whether institutions stay solvent. It is not glamorous. It is not the kind of job people ask about at Thanksgiving dinner. But it meant that I understood forms. It meant I read the fine print. It meant that when my father had a stroke in March of 2022, I was the one who knew exactly what every document said. I want to tell you about the 2 months before that stroke, because they matter. In January of 2022, my father called me on a Sunday afternoon and asked if I could come by the house, alone. My mother was out with Tiffany. They'd gone to some home goods store, the kind of outing they did regularly, the kind I was never part of because I lived 40 minutes away and had my own schedule. I drove to Dublin and found my father sitting at the kitchen table with a white envelope in front of him. He was 63 years old, and he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not sick tired, aware tired. The kind of tiredness that comes from knowing something. He pushed the envelope across the table without saying much at first. I opened it. Inside was a healthcare power of attorney document, properly notarized, naming me as his agent. I read it twice before I looked up at him. He said, "I'm not asking you to fight anyone. I'm asking you to make sure things are done right if it comes to that." I asked him why not my mother. He said, "Your mother loves me, but she can't read a form without crying. You can." That was all. We didn't talk about it for very long. He didn't explain why he'd had it drawn up or what specifically he was worried about, or why he hadn't told my mother. I didn't push. I folded the envelope, put it in my bag, drove back to Columbus, and put it in the top drawer of my desk at home. 2 months later, on a Wednesday morning in early March, my mother called me at 6 o'clock. My father had collapsed. He was in the emergency room at Dublin Methodist. I used 9 days of PTO in the 11 days he was hospitalized. I was there every day. I handled the insurance coordination, the discharge planning, the communication with his care team, the home health aid research, the medication management schedules. I did all of this because I knew how, and because my mother was overwhelmed, and because someone had to. Tiffany came twice. The first time she stayed about 90 minutes. She cried, which everyone noticed, and then she said she had a shift and left. The second time she brought flowers. She stayed for an hour. She posted something on social media about family being everything. I didn't post anything. I was in the hospital talking to a discharge planner about home safety modifications. When my father came home, I stayed the first night. I slept on their couch. Before I left the next morning, I had already installed the grab bar in the downstairs bathroom, set up his medication system, and confirmed his first follow-up appointment with his cardiologist. My mother came through the kitchen as I was finishing the grab bar installation. She looked at what I'd done, nodded, and then said, "Does Tiffany know Dad's home? She should come by." I said I wasn't sure, and I finished tightening the last screw, and I went home. That grab bar is still there. I know because I saw it every time I drove back to Dublin over the next 3 years, which I did 31 times for his medical appointments alone, not counting the other visits for medication issues, insurance paperwork, or the nights my mother needed help with something she didn't know how to manage. The notebook I kept was black, spiral-bound, the kind you can buy in a 3-pack at any drugstore. I started it in April of 2022, about a month after my father came home from the hospital, when I realized the appointments weren't going to slow down, and I needed somewhere to put the information so it didn't get lost between my own work schedule and the irregular hours I was keeping driving back and forth to Dublin. The first entry is March 31st, his initial post-discharge follow-up with the cardiologist, a Dr. Ellison at the Dublin Methodist Outpatient Center. I wrote the date, the doctor's name, the key points from the appointment, blood pressure targets, medication adjustments, the timeline for the next imaging. I wrote in small, tight handwriting because I was trying to conserve pages. I didn't know yet how many pages I would need. By the end of 2022, I had filled 43 pages. The appointments came at irregular intervals. Some weeks there were 2, some months there was only 1. His cardiologist, his neurologist, his physical therapist for the first 8 months, his primary care physician for the quarterly check-ins. There was a period in early 2023 when he was having some vision disturbances and we added an ophthalmologist to the rotation. That lasted about 4 months before the issue resolved. Each appointment was 40 minutes each way, sometimes longer, depending on traffic on 270. I learned which routes were faster at which times of day. I knew that if I left Columbus before 7:30, I could make it to Dublin in under 40 minutes. If I left after 8, I was looking at closer to an hour. I arranged my work schedule around this knowledge the way other people arrange their schedules around their children's school pickups. Without drama, without announcement, just as a structural fact of life. Tiffany lived 11 minutes from my parents' house. I know the exact distance because I looked it up once, on a night when I was sitting in a hospital waiting room and had nothing else to do with my hands. 11 minutes. She made that drive to attend a medical appointment 0 times in 3 years. I'm not saying this to perform grievance. I'm saying it because the numbers are the story. The numbers don't require interpretation. The financial piece of it I managed separately. The $28,000 I'd wire later was the largest single expenditure, but it wasn't the only one. There were smaller amounts throughout, copays that my parents couldn't cover because their fixed income was tighter than they let on. A month where my father's supplemental insurance lapsed because my mother had missed a payment, and I caught it and covered the gap. A piece of medical equipment, a portable blood pressure monitor, that wasn't covered under their plan and that I bought and brought over without mentioning the cost. None of those amounts were individually significant, but they accumulated, and I kept track of all of them in a separate column in the notebook, not because I planned to present a bill, but because I am someone who tracks things. I cannot help it. It's the way my brain is built. The 4 conversations I tried to have with my mother about Tiffany sharing some portion of the caregiving happened over the course of about 18 months, spread unevenly across 2022 and 2023. The first time, my mother said Tiffany was busy. The second time, she said Tiffany wasn't feeling well. The third time, she changed the subject entirely. The fourth time was in October of 2023, at the kitchen table in Dublin. I had driven over to drop off a refill of one of my father's prescriptions. The pharmacy near my parents had run out of his specific dosage, and I'd picked it up from one closer to my office. My mother was making dinner. My father was in the living room watching something on television. I sat down at the table and said, as directly as I knew how, that I needed Tiffany to take on at least 1 appointment per month. That was all I was asking, 1 appointment. 11 minutes each way. I would send the calendar invite, prep the documentation, make it as easy as possible. My mother kept her back to me while I talked. She was stirring something on the stove, and she didn't stop stirring. When I finished, she said, "Betty, you're so much better at this than she is." She said it gently. She said it the way you'd say something that was simply true, a fact that didn't require argument. And the worst part is that it was, on a purely technical level, accurate. I was better at it than Tiffany. I had always been better at the difficult practical things. That was the whole architecture of our family. I was the one who was good at hard things, so I was the one who did them, so I became even better at them. So the gap widened, so the expectation deepened, until the competence itself became the justification for the arrangement. You're so much better at this than she is. What it meant was, so keep doing it. What it meant was, this conversation is over. What it meant was, I know this is unfair and I have chosen not to change it. I didn't say any of that. I looked at my mother's back for a moment. Then I picked up my bag and said goodbye to my father on my way through the living room, and I drove home. After that, I stopped asking. Now I want to tell you about August of 2022, because that's when the thing I'm really talking about began, even though I didn't understand it that way at the time. I was at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, processing one of my father's insurance claims, routine work, the kind of thing that would have taken my mother days and probably multiple phone calls with people she didn't understand. It took me about an hour. In the course of that hour, I found something I wasn't looking for. Buried in a billing summary attached to one of the claim documents was a reference to an outstanding lien on the Baker family property. It had been filed by a medical creditor in 2020, stemming from a procedure my father had in 2019, before his stroke, before I was involved in any of his paperwork. The lien was for $96,000. It was attached to the title of the house on their street in Dublin. And based on the filing date and the escalation schedule, it was approaching a threshold that could trigger foreclosure action within 18 to 24 months if it remained unresolved. I sat with that information for a long time. My mother did not know. My father, I wasn't sure. He might have known and said nothing. He might have genuinely not understood the severity. Either way, no one had done anything about it. I thought about what would happen if I told them. My mother would panic. Tiffany would say it wasn't her problem, or she'd make it about her own stress. My father was still in early recovery and didn't need the weight of it. And realistically, neither of them had the financial fluency to negotiate with a medical creditor, navigate lien release procedures, or manage the paperwork that would be required to resolve it cleanly. So I called the billing department the next morning. I spent 2 weeks negotiating. I got them down from $96,000 to $28,000 as a settlement figure that would stop the escalation and move toward lien resolution. I wired the money from my savings account at 2:14 in the morning on a Tuesday. The confirmation email came back within minutes. I forwarded it to my personal address. I downloaded the PDF. I created a folder on my laptop and labeled it Baker Property. I put everything in it: the original lien notice, the negotiation correspondence, the payment confirmation, the bank statement showing the transfer. And then I went to bed and I went to work the next morning, and I did not tell anyone. I want you to understand something about that decision. I didn't make it strategically. I didn't sit there thinking, I'll hold this in reserve and use it later. I made it the way I made most decisions in that family. I fixed the problem, I absorbed the cost, and I moved on. That's what I always did. That's what I had been trained to do since I was a child, watching my mother ask Tiffany if she'd finished her homework. The lien didn't get fully released because the settlement I paid addressed the escalation risk, but not the complete resolution. Full release required additional paperwork that I hadn't gotten around to filing, partly because of time, partly because the immediate threat was neutralized and the urgency faded. The lien remained on the title record, listed as active, pending complete resolution. I knew this. I checked the county recorder's website periodically. I noted it in my folder. I told myself I'd get around to finalizing the release. I kept not getting around to it. The last straw, if I'm being honest, wasn't any of those 4 conversations with my mother. It was a Tuesday evening in June of 2025. I had a 2-day work trip to Cincinnati, a compliance training conference I'd been looking forward to, partly because it was professionally useful, and partly because it was the first overnight trip I'd taken in nearly a year that wasn't tied to my parents' needs. I had a room to myself in a hotel with good water pressure and a restaurant downstairs that served food I hadn't had to think about ordering. It was, by any reasonable measure, a small and overdue luxury. I asked Tiffany if she could stay at the house and make sure my father's medications were covered. She agreed. It was the first and only time in 3 years she'd agreed to anything like it. I was in my hotel room on the second evening when my father texted me. The message said, "Tiffany forgot my evening meds. I think it's okay, but wanted you to know." I drove back to Dublin that night. I got there around 11. The house was lit up in the irregular way it gets when multiple rooms have lights on, but nobody's coordinating them. My father's bedroom dark, the kitchen light on, the upstairs room where Tiffany stayed blazing bright. I could hear her voice faintly through the window when I got out of the car. She was laughing at something her audience had said. She was doing a live stream. I did not knock on her door. There was a version of that evening where I told her what I thought, where I said the things I had been not saying for 3 years. I stood in the hallway outside her room and I thought about that version. I decided against it. Not because I was being generous, but because it would have required me to hand her my anger, and my anger was not something I wanted to give away. I went to the kitchen. My father was at the table in his robe, a glass of water in front of him, the medication organizer open and untouched in the PM compartment. He looked up when I came in, and the expression on his face was something I hadn't seen from him before. Not embarrassment exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who's aware, once again, that he has required more from one daughter than the other, and who does not know how to account for this in a way that changes anything. I sat down across from him. I took the correct tablets out of the organizer and put them in his palm and watched him take them with water. Then I sat back and we were quiet together the way we had learned to be over the past 3 years. A silence that neither of us needed to fill. He said, "Thank you, Bug," I said. "Go to bed, Dad." He went. I sat in the kitchen for a few more minutes after I heard his door close. Through the open bathroom doorway, I could see the grab bar, the one I'd installed at 9 o'clock on his first night home, white against white tile. Still there, a small permanent thing. I went out to my car and sat in the dark. My phone showed an email notification from the Dublin County Recorder's Office, an automated update about the lien status on the Baker property address. I had set up the alerts months ago, professional habit more than anything deliberate. The notice said the lien remained active. It said that any conveyance or transfer of the property, while the lien remained in active status, would require lien holder consent or full satisfaction of the lien obligation prior to recording. I read it twice. I saved it. I added it to the Baker property folder. Then I sat there another few minutes, watching the light in Tiffany's window, thinking about the drive I had just made, 90 minutes each way in the middle of the night, for a task that should have taken her 3 minutes and a glass of water. I drove home. I did not go back to Cincinnati. Thanksgiving was 5 months later. My mother called the Tuesday before to remind me what time dinner started. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask if I needed anything. She told me dinner was at 5, and I said I'd be there, and that was the entire conversation. I made a pie. Apple, from scratch. I put it in a white pastry box and tied it with brown kitchen twine because that's what I had in the drawer. That detail matters to me for reasons I can't fully explain. I think because it's evidence of good faith. I was not going to that dinner looking for a fight. I was bringing a pie. When I arrived, I noticed there were more people than usual. 3 of my mother's siblings and their spouses had been invited. My Aunt Patrice, my Uncle Gerald, my Aunt Norma. 14 people total, including Tiffany's boyfriend, who I'd met twice. The living room was fuller than I was used to. There was a particular quality to the energy. Something organized, something that had been arranged in advance. My mother's energy was different. She kept glancing at Tiffany the way people look at someone who's about to blow out birthday candles. My father looked tired. He'd been having a harder month, some blood pressure fluctuations, an extra appointment I'd gone to with him in early November. He squeezed my arm when I came in, and I asked him quietly how he was feeling, and he said, "Okay. We sat down at 5 o'clock. The food was good. The conversation moved around me in the way it always did at Baker family dinners. My mother and Tiffany at the center, everyone else orbiting. I ate and listened and refilled the water pitcher twice because that's the kind of thing I notice needs doing. We were somewhere between the main course and dessert when Tiffany pushed her chair back and stood up. Nobody asked her to. She just stood, and the table got quiet the way tables do when someone makes a physical statement. She said she had something to share. She said it with a smile she'd clearly deployed so many times that it had become automatic, the wide, certain smile of someone who has never had to work very hard for attention and therefore cannot imagine a room not being pleased to give it. She said that after a lot of thought, after many conversations, her parents had made a decision about the house and about the future, and she wanted the family to hear it together. Mom and Dad were signing the house over to her. She would be there for them, nearby, available, present. She would make sure they were looked after. That was what family was supposed to do, and that was what she was going to do. My Aunt Patrice said that was wonderful. My Uncle Gerald raised his wine glass. 2 other people clapped. My mother reached across and took Tiffany's hand and looked at her with an expression of complete satisfaction. The expression of someone who believes they have successfully arranged the world. Then Tiffany looked at me. She said, "Betty gets nothing. She has her own life in Columbus." She said it without malice, which was almost the worst part. Malice would have implied that she understood what she was taking. This was just information delivery, a clarifying statement, the kind you make when you want to head off confusion. Betty gets nothing. She has her own life. Not one person at that table turned to look at me when she said it. Not a single person checked my face, or thought to redirect, or offered any acknowledgement that I was a person in the room who had just been described as receiving nothing in front of 14 people. My father was looking at his plate. I was holding my water glass. I was aware of holding it, aware that I was choosing not to put it down, aware of the strange calm that had settled over me in the seconds since Tiffany had spoken. It was not the calm of acceptance. It was the calm of a person who has just had something confirmed that they had been half expecting for a long time, and who is now deciding in real time what to do with that confirmation. I looked at my father. He felt it. He raised his eyes from his plate and found mine across the table, and in his expression there was something I couldn't entirely name. Not guilt exactly, because guilt implies surprise, and I don't think he was surprised. Something older and heavier. The look of a man who has been carrying a piece of knowledge and is now watching the person that knowledge belongs to decide whether to reach out and take it. I said, quietly enough that only the people nearest to me could hear the first word clearly. "Dad, should I tell them, or will you?" The fork left his hand. It didn't fall dramatically. It slipped. The way things slip when a person's grip goes loose very suddenly, and it hit the rim of his plate and then the tablecloth, and made a small, clear sound that was somehow louder in that room than it should have been. A silence radiated out from it. Tiffany said, "Tell us what? What are you talking about?" Her voice had a different quality now. The practiced brightness was gone. Something underneath it was showing, something younger and less certain. I looked at her. I looked at the table full of people who had just applauded. I thought about the white box on the kitchen counter with the pie in it. I thought about the drive from Cincinnati. I thought about the grab bar and the notebook and 2:14 in the morning. I said, not tonight, but soon. I put my glass down. I stood up. I got my coat from the hook in the hallway and put it on. On my way back through the dining room, I paused at the end of the table. I said to Tiffany, without looking at her directly, read the title report when you get a chance. Then I walked out the front door and closed it behind me, quietly. There is no satisfaction in slamming a door. The satisfaction was in the quiet, in the fact that I was the one choosing to leave, and in the very specific sound of a latch clicking into place. I sat in my car for a moment before I started it. Through the living room window, I could see the shapes of people at the table, nobody moving. My father's chair was visible from this angle. He was not turned toward the window. I pulled out of the driveway and drove. The 3 phone calls came in the order I had expected. My mother first, then Tiffany, then my mother again. The landline came last, and that was the one that made me pull into a gas station parking lot. Not because I was going to answer, but because I needed a moment to sit with the fact that my father had gone to the trouble of using it. Raymond Baker, who had a cell phone in his breast pocket, who had my number saved with a small red maple leaf emoji I'd put there as a joke 2 years ago, and he'd never removed. He had walked to the kitchen and picked up the handset of the telephone that sat on the counter next to the coffee maker and dialed my number the old way. That meant something. I wasn't ready to decide what yet. I let it ring out. I drove the rest of the way home in the same silence. At 11:15, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a mug of tea. I opened the Baker property folder for the first time in 4 months. 11 documents, organized by date. I read through all of them in sequence, not skimming, reading, the way I would read through a compliance file before a meeting where I needed to know everything. The lien filing record, the negotiation emails with the billing department, the bank statement showing the transfer, the payment confirmation with its 2:14 timestamp, the title search reports, 2 of them, one from 2022 and one from October of 2025, the certified copy of the healthcare power of attorney, signed by Raymond Baker on January 15, 2022. That date, 2 months before the stroke. I had always known this, but sitting at my table that night, reading it again, it carried different weight. He had known something was wrong before March. Not stroke specifically, maybe, but something. Some accumulated awareness of his body sending signals he was trying to take seriously. He had gone quietly, without telling my mother, to have a document prepared that named me as his healthcare agent. He had put it in an envelope and kept it until a Sunday when my mother was out, and then he had put it in front of me and asked me to keep it somewhere safe. He had done that before anything happened. He had done it because he wanted, if something happened, for there to be someone with steady hands in charge. And he had picked me. I sat with that for a while. Then I read the footnote on the October 2025 title search report. The language I knew was there, that I had read before, that I had never had a reason to act on. Any transfer of property while a lien remains in active status requires either written consent of the lien holder or full satisfaction of the lien obligation prior to recording. I was the lien holder. I had been for 3 years. The lien was still active because I had stopped the escalation but never filed the final release paperwork. The house, as of that moment, could not legally be transferred without my involvement. I had known this in the abstract for a long time. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, I understood it differently. At 12:03, I called Donna Holt. She was a real estate attorney I'd worked with professionally on an insurance compliance matter in 2023. Sharp, efficient, not someone who wasted time. I got her voicemail, which I'd expected. I left a message that said what I needed it to say and nothing extra. A consultation, first available Monday, property lien, potential title transfer, full documentation. I sent a follow-up email at 12:07 with the title search report attached. Then I closed the laptop and sat for a while in the quiet of my apartment. I thought about my father. Not about the lien, not about the house. About the man who had walked to a landline telephone at 9 o'clock on a Thursday evening. About the Sunday in January when he had pushed that white envelope across the kitchen table and asked me to keep it somewhere safe. about all the times in 3 years when he had said thank you in the small ways he knew how. The hand held briefly in a waiting room, the word bug said in a kitchen at 11 at night, the way he looked at me at the beginning of every appointment, before the doctor came in, like he was making sure I was still there. I thought about whether he'd known, sitting across from me at Thanksgiving, what I was holding. Whether the fork had dropped because he was frightened, or because he was relieved, or some combination of both that doesn't have a clean name. I didn't have an answer. I went to bed and lay in the dark for a while and eventually slept. Donna called Friday morning and confirmed 9:30 on Monday. I spent the weekend doing ordinary things. Laundry, groceries, a Saturday morning run through Goodale Park. And I did not answer my mother's calls or Tiffany's messages. And I did not call my father back because I was not ready yet, and I had learned, gradually, that it was okay to be not ready as long as you knew the direction you were heading. Monday morning, I drove to Donna's office with a physical folder and a USB drive containing every document in the Baker property archive. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, windows facing west, the kind of organized desk that told you she was someone who respected information. She read everything without speaking. I drank the coffee her assistant had brought and watched the street below. When she looked up, the first thing she said was, "You've been holding this for how long?" "August 2022, I said. "And you paid the $28,000 yourself, from your personal account?" "Yes." She set her pen down. "Betty, the lien is still active because you never filed the release, which means you are, at this moment, the de facto lien holder on a property valued at approximately $385,000. She paused. "Any title transfer goes through you." "I know," I said. "Then we have everything we need." She picked up her pen again. "What do you want out of this?" That was the question I'd been sitting with since Tuesday night. I had not let myself answer it until that moment, in that chair, with the folder open on her desk. "I don't want the house," I said. "I never wanted the house." She waited. "I want 3 things. I want the $28,000 returned to me from the family's assets. I want a written acknowledgement that I served as primary caregiver to my father for the 3 years following his stroke. And I want the title transfer suspended until both of those conditions are met." I paused. "That's all." Donna looked at me for a moment. "That's very reasonable," she said. "I know," I said. She drafted the formal legal notice over the next 2 days. It went out by certified mail on Wednesday, December 3rd. Addressed to Raymond and Carol Baker at the Dublin address. The notice stated that an active lien existed on the property, that Betty A. Baker was the lien holder of record, and that any title transfer required either her written consent or full lien satisfaction. It listed my 3 conditions. It included certified copies of the bank statement, the lien filing record, and the POA document as exhibits. My mother signed for it at 10:47 on Thursday morning. My mother called me 6 times that day. I counted later when I looked at my missed calls log. 6 calls, spread across 8 hours, beginning at 11:03 in the morning and ending at 7:14 in the evening. I did not answer any of them. The messages from Tiffany started Thursday afternoon and continued through the weekend. They had a particular arc: confusion shading into alarm, shading into accusation, shading into appeals to family feeling. 22 messages total across 2 days, and not one of them asked how I was doing, or acknowledged what I had done, or said anything that demonstrated any understanding of what the previous 3 years had looked like. They were the messages of someone who had grown up in a house where inconvenient things were managed by other people, and who therefore had very little practice sitting with something uncomfortable and working through it herself. I read each message once. I did not respond to any of them. My father's voicemail came Thursday evening. 2 words after my name. "Call me when you're ready. No rush." I listened to it twice, sitting at my kitchen table after work. No rush. My father, who had built things with his hands for 30 years and had very little patience for indirection, using those 2 words. They cost him something. I knew that. I wasn't ready yet. I put my phone face down on the table and sat with the quiet. The Sunday meeting was my mother's idea, framed as a request but carrying the unspoken assumption that I would comply. I agreed with one condition. Only the 4 of us. She agreed. I arrived at 2 in the afternoon with the gray folder on the passenger seat. The house looked the same from the outside. It always looked the same. The concrete path to the front door with the slight crack near the second square that had been there since I was in college and that no one had ever fixed. I went in without knocking. I put the folder on the kitchen table the moment I walked in. Didn't say hello first. Just put it down and stood there. My father was at the head of the table. He looked at the folder and then at me and didn't say anything. Tiffany was sitting beside my mother, arms crossed, expression set for confrontation. My mother started before I sat down. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be. She said my father didn't need this kind of stress. She said Tiffany was going to be there for them. That was the plan. And that whatever I thought I was owed, this wasn't the way to handle it. She said this wasn't how the family operated. She talked for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I know because I checked my phone afterward. When she finished, I said 2 words. Page 1. She looked at the folder like she was deciding whether to touch it. Then she opened it. I walked them through everything, the way I would walk a client through a compliance finding. Here is the document. Here is what it says. Here is what it means. The lien, the date it was filed, the amount, the payment I had made in August 2022, the bank statement showing the transfer from my account, the timestamp, the fact that the lien had never been fully released, and what that meant for any title transfer under Ohio property law. My father looked at the bank statement for a long time. My mother asked why I hadn't told them. I said, would it have mattered? There was a silence in that kitchen that lasted longer than anything anyone said that afternoon. It lasted long enough that it became its own kind of answer. My mother looked at the table. My father looked at the bank statement. Tiffany read through to the last page, then closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. This isn't fair, she said. I didn't look at her. I looked at my mother, Carol Baker, who had told me 4 times in 3 years that I was so much better at this, and used that as the reason to keep me doing it indefinitely, who had arranged a Thanksgiving dinner with 14 people and let her younger daughter announce, in front of all of them, that the older one got nothing, and had smiled while it happened. I said, no, it wasn't. 2 words, flat. I held her eyes for a moment. She looked away first. Then I stood up, gathered the extra copies of the folder, and put on my coat. At the door, I turned back. The deadline is January 15th. Donna Holt's contact is on the last page. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the house through the windshield. Through the kitchen window, I could see my mother still at the table, not moving. My father had his hands folded in front of him, looking at nothing. I started the car and drove. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way of things that have been set in motion and now simply need time to run. I went to work. I went to the gym on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I called the friend in Clintonville, and we got dinner on a Friday and talked about her new job and her apartment renovation. And I did not bring up anything about Dublin, because I have never been someone who needed to narrate my life to feel like it was real. My mother sent a long text on December 10th. It covered familiar ground. I was hurting the family. This wasn't what family did. She had given everything for both of us. It ended the same way her messages always ended. We're family, Betty. I read it at 7 in the morning on my way to work. I archived it without responding. Tiffany called 3 times over the same period. I didn't answer. On December 19th, Donna called to tell me the Baker family had retained a local attorney. His opening offer was $15,000 and a verbal acknowledgement. I said no. His second offer, on December 26th, was $20,000 and a written letter of appreciation. I want you to sit with that phrase for a moment. A letter of appreciation, after 3 years and $28,000 out of my own savings, after 31 medical appointments and 9 days of PTO, and a grab bar installed at 9 o'clock at night, and a drive back from Cincinnati at 11, because my sister had forgotten to give my father his medication. A letter of appreciation. I told Donna, no. My terms had not changed. The other attorney went quiet. Donna told me on December 28th they might be regrouping or preparing something else. I told her the deadline didn't move. January came in cold and flat the way it comes to Columbus. Not dramatically, just relentlessly. I bought new running shoes and started going out in the mornings, even when the temperature was in the 20s, because I needed to be outside and I needed to move. And there is something clarifying about cold air in the lungs at 6 in the morning, when the streets are empty and the sky hasn't fully committed to daylight yet. On January 14th, one day before the deadline, at 4:47 in the afternoon, my phone rang. Donna said, "Wire transfer confirmed. $28,000, full amount, from Carol Baker's account." I said thank you and hung up. I sat at my desk for a moment with my hands flat on the surface. Then I stood up, got my coat, took the elevator down, and walked out into the January afternoon. The building's mail slot was on the ground floor. I checked it out of habit. There was a small envelope, Dublin postmark, handwriting I recognized. Wider space than it used to be, the letters taking more deliberate effort. I stood in the lobby and opened it. One sheet of paper, folded once. 8 lines in my father's handwriting. "Betty, I'm sorry it took this long. I always knew you were the one who kept things together. I should have said it sooner. That's all I know how to say. Dad." No signature from my mother, nothing from Tiffany. Just Raymond Baker's handwriting, doing what he had always done when something mattered. Spare, exact, no extra words. I read it standing in the lobby with my coat still on and the cold air coming in through the glass doors every time someone entered or left. Then I took the elevator up and sat down on the floor of my hallway, back against the wall, and read it again. I didn't cry. That's not a point of pride. It's just what happened. I sat there for a while with the paper in my hands and let the day settle around me. In the apartment above mine, someone was moving furniture. A door opened somewhere down the hall and closed again. Normal sounds. After a while, I got up and put the letter in the drawer of my nightstand. Not in the Baker property folder, not with the documents. Somewhere else. The letter was not evidence. It was not leverage. It was just a piece of paper with my father's handwriting on it that said, "I know who you are." Finally, out loud. The next morning I drove to Donna's office and signed the lien release. She asked how I felt. I thought about it honestly. "Finished?" I said. "Not fixed. Just finished." She nodded like she understood the distinction. I shook her hand and walked out into a January morning that was cold and clear and made no particular promises. The house transferred to Tiffany in February. Donna sent a notification as a courtesy. I read the subject line and archived it without opening the attachment. It was no longer about the house. It had never really been about the house. In March, I started looking at listings in Short North. I had walked through that neighborhood on weekend afternoons for years. The coffee shops, the galleries, the specific quality of afternoon light on the painted storefronts. And I had always passed through it as a visitor. Something for later, not yet. Those 2 words had governed so much of my adult life. The apartment upgrade I'd thought about and deferred. The furniture I'd wanted and bought the cheaper version of. The trip I'd planned and postponed. Later, 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 as though there were a condition I needed to satisfy first, before I was allowed to want things for myself. I looked at 6 condos. The 7th was on the 4th floor of a building on a one-way street. 2 bedrooms, west-facing balcony. The afternoon light came through at 4 o'clock, like someone had arranged it specifically for that space, landing on the floor in a wide, warm rectangle that moved slowly toward the wall as the hour went on. My realtor was saying something about storage and HOA fees, and I was listening from a distance, because I was standing on that balcony, looking at what the light did to the street below and thinking, this is the one. I made an offer that afternoon. We were in contract within a week. We closed in May. The $28,000 went toward the down payment, combined with 4 years of savings I had accumulated by living the way I always had, without spending money on things I'd told myself were for later. The papers were signed on a Tuesday morning. 2 friends came that afternoon and helped carry boxes up 4 flights, because the elevator was slow and we had nowhere else to be. We ate pizza on the floor of the empty living room and talked about nothing in particular. And outside the window, the May light was doing what it did. Long and unhurried. The kind of evening that doesn't require anything from you. The first thing I bought for the condo, that Saturday at the farmer's market on Pearl Alley, was a small succulent in a terracotta pot. The woman selling it told me it was nearly impossible to kill. It wanted indirect light and water once a week at most, and if I forgot, it would wait. I said that sounded about right. I put it on the balcony railing where the afternoon light would reach it without burning it. June was warm and long. I fell into a rhythm. Work, the morning run, evenings on the balcony with a book or sometimes nothing. Just the city settling into itself as the light changed. It was the first time in as long as I could remember that my time felt like mine, not borrowed, not owed to someone else. On a Saturday afternoon in late June, my phone rang. My father's cell, the smartphone he'd gotten in the spring. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I picked up. He asked if this was a good time. I said it was. He asked if I had a new place. I said I did. He asked if I liked it. I told him I did. He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him breathing, and I could picture him exactly. In the kitchen or the living room, in the chair that had always been his, holding the phone slightly too far from his face the way people do when they're still adjusting to touching screens. He said, "I'm proud of you. I should have said that more, a lot more." His voice was steady but careful, the voice of a man who had rehearsed something and was hoping the rehearsal held. I could hear the effort in it. The deliberate choosing of words by someone who had always been sparse with them, who was trying, this once, to close the gap between what he understood and what he said. I looked at the succulent on the railing. Late afternoon, the light coming in sideways, the plant doing exactly what it was supposed to do, existing without asking anything of me. I said, "I know, Dad." Not "thank you," not "it's okay." Not any of the phrases that would have required me to manage his feelings along with my own. Just, "I know," which was true. I had known it in the way you know things that are demonstrated rather than spoken. I had known it the January afternoon he pushed an envelope across a kitchen table. I had known it in the way he said thank you, bug at 11 o'clock at night, while his other daughter was live streaming upstairs. I had known it in the way he looked at me across a Thanksgiving table, his fork loose in his hand. In the half second before the world shifted, he said he was glad I'd answered. I said I was glad he called. We talked for a few more minutes. His garden, a documentary series he'd been watching, whether I'd tried the new coffee place on High Street. Normal things, the kind of conversation two people have when they're deciding whether there's still something worth building. When we hung up, I checked the time out of habit. 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I stayed on the balcony as the light shifted from gold to something cooler, the shadows lengthening across the street below. I thought about the January afternoon in that kitchen, the white envelope sliding across the table toward me. He had chosen me then, not loudly, not in a way he ever fully defended or explained, not in a way that protected me from what came after, but he had chosen me. And this afternoon he had picked up the phone and chosen me again. 2 imperfect choices. Not enough to undo anything. Not enough to fix the years of dinners where no one noticed what I was carrying, or the 4 conversations that ended with my mother's back turned at the stove, or the 22 messages that asked what I was going to do and never once asked how I was, but enough to hold. I went inside when the air got cooler. The succulent was still on the railing when I did. I didn't bring it in, didn't fuss over it, didn't think about it. It didn't need me to think about it to keep growing. That was the whole point. 3 months after I bought the condo, I got a call from my Aunt Patrice. She was one of the 14 people at that Thanksgiving table. She had said, "That's wonderful," when Tiffany made her announcement. I remembered that clearly, her voice, the specific warmth in it, the way she'd reached for her wine glass right after like the moment deserved a small celebration. I almost didn't pick up. I did, because Patrice had always been the one member of my mother's family who occasionally said things that were true. And I was curious which version of this call it was going to be. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving." I said, "Okay." She said she hadn't known. About the lien, about the money, about any of it. She said that when she had heard, through my mother, she clarified, not through me. She hadn't known what to think at first. And then she'd thought about it for a few weeks. And she wanted me to know that what I had done, the 3 years of it, was not something she had seen clearly while it was happening. And she was sorry for that. It was not a perfect apology. It didn't name everything it should have named. But it was real, which put it in rare company among the communications I'd received from that side of the family in the past year. I told her I appreciated her saying so. I meant it. We talked for about 10 minutes, about her house in Florida, about my new place, about nothing that required anything difficult from either of us. When we hung up, I sat with the call for a moment, turning it over. It didn't change anything structural, but it was a data point I hadn't expected. And I filed it the way I file things that don't fit neatly into existing categories. Some people, it turns out, are capable of updating their understanding when they get new information. That's rarer than it should be. My mother called me in September, not to apologize. I want to be clear about that, because I think clarity matters more than a tidy narrative. She called to tell me that my father's most recent cardiology appointment had gone well, that his numbers were stable, that the doctor was pleased with his progress. She delivered this information the way you'd read from a prepared statement. And when she finished, there was a pause that I understood was her deciding whether to say something else. She didn't say it. She said, "I thought you'd want to know," and then she said goodbye. I thought about that call for several days afterward. Not with anger. I had mostly moved through the anger by then. The way you move through a room and come out the other side. What I felt was something more like recognition. My mother had called to tell me about my father's health, which meant that on some level, she still understood that I was the person in this family who needed to know that, who would want to know that, who had earned the right to know that through 3 years of being the one who showed up. She hadn't said any of that out loud. She probably never would. But she had made the call. I filed that one too. Tiffany, I haven't spoken to. That's not a dramatic statement. It's simply where things are. She sent one message in March, about 4 months after everything settled. It said, "I hope you know I never meant for it to go that way." I read it twice. I thought about what it would mean to respond, what I would say, whether anything useful could come from the conversation that would follow. I didn't arrive at a satisfying answer. I left the message unread and I moved on with my Tuesday. Maybe that changes eventually. Maybe it doesn't. I find I can hold that uncertainty without it requiring resolution. What I didn't expect, what genuinely surprised me, in the quiet way that things surprise you when you've stopped bracing for the next blow, was my father. He calls every few weeks now, not long calls. He is not and has never been a man built for long telephone conversations. But he calls. He asks how work is going. He asks about the condo, whether I've gotten furniture yet, whether the balcony gets enough afternoon light in the fall. He asked once, carefully, whether I was happy there, and the carefulness of the question, the way he held it, like something that might break if handled wrong, told me more than whatever answer I gave him. I told him I was. He said good. We talked about his tomatoes for a few minutes after that. Last month he asked if he could come see the place. Just him. Not my mother, not Tiffany. He said he'd take the bus. There's a direct line from Dublin to downtown Columbus that he'd apparently researched, which meant he'd been thinking about asking for longer than he let on. I said yes. He came on a Saturday morning in October, when the light was doing the thing it does in autumn, lower and more golden, coming through the west-facing windows at an angle that made the whole apartment look considered. I made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, which is small, the right size for one person or two, and we talked for 2 hours. We talked about his contractor years, stories I'd heard pieces of but never the full versions, the projects he was proud of, the ones that went wrong, the particular satisfaction of building something with your hands that would outlast you. We talked about my work, what I actually do day to day, which he admitted he had never fully understood before. He asked questions and listened to the answers the way someone listens when they're genuinely trying to understand something, not just waiting for their turn to speak. We didn't talk about Thanksgiving. We didn't talk about the lien or the money or any of the events of the past year. There was no dramatic reckoning. No scene where he laid everything out and named his failures one by one and I received them gracefully. That's not who Raymond Baker is. I have made my peace with that. What he did at some point in the second hour was look around the apartment, the kitchen, the living room, the balcony visible through the glass door, where the succulent sat in its pot in the October light. And he said, "You did good, Betty." 4 words, the kind of sentence he was built for. I got up and refilled both our coffees and said, "I know, Dad." He left around noon. I walked him to the elevator, and when the doors opened, he turned back and looked at me the way he'd looked at me across that Thanksgiving table. Except this time, there was nothing heavy in it, nothing unresolved. Just a father looking at his daughter in her own apartment on a Saturday morning in October. The doors closed. I went back inside. The apartment was quiet in the way it is after someone leaves. Not empty, just returned to itself. I washed both coffee cups and set them on the drying rack and stood at the kitchen window for a minute, looking at the street below. Then I went out to the balcony and checked on the succulent. It had put out a new small growth since I'd last looked closely. A pale green offshoot at the base, compact and certain of itself, growing in the direction of the light without being asked. I went back inside and got on with my Saturday. If any part of this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've been the person in this family who always shows up, always fixes it, always absorbs the cost without being asked, leave a comment below. I read every single one.